then Cook, right? Probably the best pure runner in our game right now.
In the 7 games since Antonio Brown signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, their offense has fallen off a cliff.
You know, I know we all wish we were 12-0 at this point. At the end of the year, there's only going to be one team that's happy with the way the season ends.
That last voice from Tom Brady. This is a really big game this particular weekend. The Bucs at 7-5 will host the Vikings, who are 6-6. If you're wondering right now, Tom and company occupying the 6th spot in the NFC.
I know it's Friday.
And the Vikings are right there in that coveted last spot at number 7. So you could imagine what the stakes are really going to be for both teams. It's time for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Mike Greenberg of Greeny, which you can hear every afternoon, of course, here on ESPN Radio, ESPN Plus. He had a pretty interesting perspective. He said you remove one offensive piece, and certainly not the greatest offensive piece the Bucs have, and the residual effect on Antonio Brown, by the way, the Bucs 1-3 since they signed AB, is a little interesting. Take a listen to this rationale.
Whoever would have thought with all those names on that team that Scotty Miller's absence would be making this much difference, but it does seem as though it has. And so I'm not sitting here saying Antonio Brown is the problem, but sometimes these things have impact on other things. It is why, for the most part, players play and general managers generally manage. The acquisition of Leonard Fournette hasn't done anything. Gronk has played well. Antonio Brown might actually have created more trouble than he has solved.
Created more trouble?
Well, he's not talking about off the field behavior and things like that. What he's talking about is getting a guy. You know, here's what happened. I'll tell you exactly what has taken place. And I understand what Greeny is saying. Scotty Miller is not the difference. I'm sorry, he's not the
marginal
difference.
Guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player, but he's not the difference. What has happened, Jay Will, is you have a Porsche. You have a nice truck, Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. You have a Bentley. You have a Cadillac truck. And then all of a sudden you decide that you're going to go get a Ferrari. So you neglect all those other cars that you've been driving around in for a while. I mean, you got this Ferrari, you're like, okay, I'm going to now drive this all the time and forget about those other cars that have been getting you to those places. And this is what has happened to the Bucs offense. Is they inserted Antonio Brown into the lineup, and Byron Leftwich, along with Bruce Arians, can't figure out how to drive all the cars. It's too many of them. When they've had success with only having 1 or 2 cars that they can pull out the garage here and there. Now you got a whole fleet, and you're trying to figure out, what do I do? Who do I use from week to week, game to game? Because I need to satisfy everybody. And this happens a lot. And then you say, well, Kansas City has a lot of toys, and New Orleans has a lot of toys, and the Rams got a lot of toys. They know what to do with them, but they all been together. There's all sorts of continuity issues that are going on with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Kansas City Chiefs have been together with everything. They've been together.
Saints, same deal.
They've been together. Tom Brady has never had this many little individual Mike Evans in and out of lineup, Scotty Miller in and out of lineup, Antonio Brown just getting there, Godwin trying to figure out in and out of the lineup. Oh, we just got Leonard Fournette. What do we do with him? What type of player is Leonard Fournette? He was this in Jacksonville. Let's see if, we don't have that same blocking scheme, or we don't have this same option for him that he had in Jacksonville. Well, we got to put Ronald Jones in to touch the ball because we're missing stuff. So when you start to get all of these little pieces, that creates problems for you. So you've got to understand 1 or 2 guys are eating at the table, and everybody else gets the scraps. That is how you should do things when you got a new offense with new players around. And Tom Brady's trying to satisfy everybody. It'll be interesting against the Minnesota Vikings, though, coming off a bye, if they sit down collectively as a group, and I think they have coaching and Tom Brady and Byron Leftwich to pull out the positive stuff that they can utilize for Gronk, for Mike Evans if he plays, for Antonio Brown, Godwin, and everybody else, so that they can still win football games. But that is the reason why.
And plus that Ferrari does require some maintenance. All cars require maintenance, but the Ferrari's maintenance is a little bit different. They've also gone through murderer's row. Now, I'm not making excuses. I'm not making excuses for Tom Brady and the Bucs here. And Key, I agree with you. Like, there is something about being together for a set amount of time. But they got smacked by the Saints. They beat the Panthers, and they had 3-point losses to the Rams and the Chiefs.
But don't even talk about that as far as the numbers on the points. Think about the defense. They faced the Saints defense, which is lights out.
Yep.
The Rams, the
So
Saints
what they did
defense
to the
is
pass
number 1
last
in the
night.
league. You know, the Rams are number 2 in the league. So when you start running up against that, this is the results. It's, as Jay was talking during the breaks and even when we was coming in, is Antonio Brown is much like Cam Newton. There's a little bit of polarizing. So the first thing you look to, oh, my God, they're 1-3 since they signed Antonio Brown.
Easy to make the numbers work.
Stop. Don't try to make it seem as though because they signed Antonio Brown that they all of a sudden are 1-3 without giving us all of everything. Much like Jay just said, it wasn't like they just played a bunch of cupcakes. It was murderer's row.
I do feel like they can't get down early in games. I'm sorry, Zubin, for cutting you off, because then they abandon the running game and they become one-dimensional offensively.
Straight Talk Wireless, no contract, no compromise. Couple points here and then a question for you both. You mentioned it's hard for everybody to eat when obviously you're focusing on 1 or 2 guys. Best example of that, you mentioned in the 4 games since they've signed Antonio Brown, 1-3 or not, in the 4 games since they've signed AB, Scotty Miller, who Mike Greenberg referenced there, has been targeted only 5 times. Not 5 catches, 5 targets since the AB signing. To buttress your point, the other thing, for both of you, if you got all these pieces and you're figuring out your wide receivers and your tight ends and trying to get as familiar with all these other guys as he is with Gronk and Leonard Fournette, considering who he is, yes, they're 7-5, but is it enough time to figure it all out before the playoffs begin? If
they lose this football game, though, to the Minnesota Vikings, I'm pretty much saying that they're probably not going to make the playoffs.
They'd be toast. Okay.
They're the 6th seed, and then they drop down. It's not about it's not about chasing the Saints and winning the division, because that's a wrap.
That's out.
That's out. So now you are in a kind of in this weird space with the NFC West, in this weird space with Minnesota, who has now beaten you to try to get to the playoffs. You know?
It'll be interesting to see what happens, especially because if they can turn it around, and Tom Brady's history in the playoffs, there are many people that believe that for him it's always been about the postseason.
Just let their offense get hot. If that moment happens, Key, where their offense gets hot and their defense starts to actually come together, if they make the playoffs, they're still a dangerous team.
Right. I mean, who deserves the benefit of the doubt in the NFL right now more than Tom Brady based on past performance? But I realize it's not about past performance that wins you playoff games. It's about the here and now.
What have you done for me lately?
No doubt about it. Still to come, plenty of teams teetering for a playoff berth, like Minnesota, like Tampa Bay. But Jay's got one team who he thinks really might be ready to crumble. He'll unveil that after Jay has this word from Sport Clips.
Where is your haircut?